Listen to the radio, Harry and Edna's Wireless Show. You heard it from the Three Bells.
What-o, Harry?
And what-o, Edna. And welcome to Harry and Edna on the Wireless, when we're going to take you by the hand and we lead you through the UK current vintage scene, while bobbing along on the Solent.
I know, in the beautiful blue-skied Solent at the moment.
I can't see anything. I can virtually not see you.
Really? Well, that was yesterday, wasn't it? It was a tad foggy.
And today is today, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, and today is a blue sky day.
What ho?
And welcome to Harry and Edna on the Wireless, when we bring you this show sponsored by beautiful cups of tea. Young Edna gave me a cup of tea, and then you turned up with a bucket for yourself. I've got this little tiny cup.
Yeah. Well, you
Look
never
at
said
the
what
size of that
you
thing.
never said what size you wanted. And I like drinking my fruit teas, which are tisane, I think they're called, as Poirot would call it. And it's fruit and stuff infused in water, and it comes in this sort of bucket, really. And I like a big bucket full of tisane. You're not into that, though.
No.
You call it hippie stuff, don't you?
No. And I've just got a little bit of, I can't say the brand, begins with T and ends with oo. That's all I've got.
No, you got from up north tea.
Tea that comes from the county of Yorkshire.
Yes.
Where all the best tea comes from.
But you never requested a size, so I plumbed for middle size.
Right.
Anyway, enough about tea.
Well, I was thinking tea. You get together with your female chums, drink tea. Could this be like when you're with the WI? Yes,
it could be. And, well, we've got lots of funny stories about when I used to do talks for the WI, but one of them was that after I was pregnant with our third child, I went off tea. It was one of the things you sort of go off when you're pregnant. And bless them, when you finished doing it, I used to do talks for the WI, and when I finished a talk, they'd always sort of turn up with a cup of tea for you, and it was one of those moments where you daren't be rude and say, actually, I don't like tea. So you have to endure endless cups of tea when you really don't like tea.
And the vintage connection here, because we do take you by the hand and lead you through the UK vintage scene, is we've got she's on the tape. We've already done the interviews with Sylvia from Vectors Forties, and she's going to be talking to us all about the WI in the Second World War and their important roles that they did. We did have a quick panic and said, is it WVS? And I said, no, it definitely says WI, Jamming Jerusalem and all that sort of stuff.
Well, we shall be enlightened shortly, won't we?
I think we will. And it's a whole series of interviews. We're going to play a bit of music, come back to you where you're going to give us some great anecdotes. I'm building you up here.
Okay,
and then we've got some more WI reenactor talk from Sylvia from Vectors Forties.
What ho?
Right. And we talked about tea.
Yes.
But the main star of the show is Sylvia from Vectors Forties talking to us about WI.
Yes.
During the Second World War. I say WI. Have you explained what the WI is? It stands for Women's Institute. And we'll let Sylvia explain what they did. But there is a bit of a theme, because we went wandering and found abandoned military installations.
We did. We're very lucky here on the little island, aren't we? Because there is an awful lot of World War II history still very prevalent in the landscape, and you don't have to go very far before you find a pillbox or a gun emplacement. And I took the children on a little walk the other day. I say little, it was 2 hours later. And we found a gun emplacement, so we were excited to take Harry here along for our walk with my... Come and see the views, because you can see the famous Needles, and it's a beautiful bit of coastline. And we just recently had my nephew visiting, so we said, let's all go on a walk. And the day we chose happened to be incredibly foggy, which didn't really help the views.
What, no view?
No, there was no view at all, and so you really couldn't see the beautiful coastline. But we found the Neolithic flint mines, and we found the Long Barrow burial mound. And then I said to Harry, just over that, what looks like a sheer drop cliff, is a gun emplacement, which we couldn't see at all because it was foggy. And then we happened upon this gun emplacement. We got all excited, and then we read the panel, didn't we? And realised maybe it actually wasn't World War Two.
No, it was abandoned just before the First World War.
1903, I think it said.
So the panel said.
Yeah, so there was a lot of gun emplacements along the coast to protect the mouth of the Solent, to obviously stop people invading the south coast of England, and to get a foothold on the island would have been devastating. So there was lots of sort of coastal defences across the island, but this was a Napoleonic coastal defence?
I'm guessing so. However, our local historian friend Barry Reed, Watto Barry, tells us there was a bit of World War II history there. Can you remember what he said? Or shall I tell our wonderful
you
listener?
enlighten our wonderful listener.
Well, are you listening, listener? This is very important. The gun battery, which we saw the thing, was, as you say,
abandoned in 1903.
Abandoned in 1903, and it was partly to protect the Solent, because the far end of the Solent is Portsmouth, the home of the British Royal Navy. However, he tells us they used that area for anti-aircraft guns.
Which makes sense, because they would have come up the Solent, wouldn't they, and then found the Thames.
Get to Portsmouth.
To Portsmouth.
No, they won't go. They won't
Sorry,
find
not
the Thames.
I meant to Portsmouth.
If you find the Thames, you've got lost.
Yeah, the Thames from Portsmouth. Yeah. Anyway.
Do you ever drive on the mainland?
I do, and I'm rubbish at geography. Anyway, so you find Portsmouth, home of our navy.
Yeah, he said it was the anti-aircraft guns to protect, protect England during the bombing that happened in the Second World War. Now, he also told us, and we've got no way of verifying this, have we? But was that there's where it juts out, it faces some more cliffs of the island. And he was saying, if you look closely, which we couldn't see because all I could see was fog, he says there's holes in this cliff because when they used to get bored or when they wanted to do target practice, they would hang targets on the side of the cliff and blow holes in the cliff.
As you do to do your target practice.
Yeah, so there you go. A bit more local history there.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
Well, local to us, if you're in Kansas, it's
not
quite a distance.
very local, but it was really interesting that they just protected the Solent from attack in World War II as well, because there's nets that were cast across, wasn't there, to stop the submarines.
Nets, yes, which is kind of fitting because our next track it has a nautical theme.
It does. Look at that. Well done.
You led us in perfectly. Are you going to introduce this track?
This is Gertrude Lawrence with My Ship.
What ho?
I'm here with Sylvia from Vectis 40s Vintage Group, who are 1940s enthusiasts. But really, Sylvia, you sort of specialise a little bit more in the WI, and actually the WI's role during World War II. How important a part did they play in civilian life?
It was very important. Lady Denman was the staunch woman of the time. She was our national chairman at the time. I am a WI member, so I will talk like that. She was the national chairman at the time in the First World War and in the Second World War. And when the Second World War came around, she was asked by the ministry to start up the preservation centres, which is what we have a display on today, but also the Land Army Girls. So she was, such a staunch woman in what she did. The preservation centres were started up all over the country, and they made jam, they did bottling and canning. And there was two on the Isle of Wight. One was at Bryston and one was at Seaview. And the women went out, collected all of the fruit, and wild things, not necessarily things from farms, but blackberries. So they made blackberry and apple jam. They collected rose hips as well, and foxgloves and nettles, and the roots of dandelions to make tea when there wasn't any available. So they did a staunch job in all sorts of things.
And preservation was a hugely important part of controlling our food and controlling the supply and demand of food, because obviously food is in abundance during summer whilst it's growing, maturing, ripening, but you're not in that position during winter.
No, that's quite right. So obviously bottling and canning and preserving in jars, jams were essential because you could have them all year round then. The government allowed the National Federation to buy £1,400 worth of sugar in 1940, and this was just distributed to the federations and then to the WIs who had canning centres and or preservation centres, and they made lots and lots of things with this. And when they'd sold it, obviously you had to pay the money back, and then they get another lot. So that's how it worked. And by the end of the war, between 40 and 45, 5,300 tonnes of fruit was preserved in this way. So it was a remarkable feat for the WI to do.
What ho!
And just taking one WI, for example, Seafew's WI, when they started out, they were just, as you say, just doing small amounts, but it really did grow.
Oh, it took off immensely. In 1940, their first batch was 92 pounds of jam and 15 bottles of fruit, but by October of that year, they'd made 740 pounds of jam, 43 bottles of unsweetened apple juice, 16 tins of gooseberries and 48 tins of tomatoes, and so it went on, and that was just one WI. The WI, that is our remit, is to teach and learn. So obviously within WIs they were teaching all the women how to do this, so the skills were then passed on to their families and their children, and it's come through the generations. So really the wartime did a good thing. It taught people how to cope. It was learning skills from other people and learning together, because a lot of these things they'd never done before. I must just say this, I've just remembered that Mrs. Roosevelt came to England, and she saw what the WI was doing at the beginning of the war, and she was so impressed that she went back to America and she got lots of canning machines sent over from America, and also mobile units so they could go around the country, because in some areas they grew more fruit than others, and so that's what they did, and it just made an awful lot of difference.
And you've got a canning machine here on your display. Could you just explain to our listeners how it worked? Because it literally is like the cans that you see in the shop.
Yes, absolutely right. The canning machine is about 1.5 feet tall. You have a handle on the top which you move around, and this makes it go up and down. So you put your can in, take it up, and then there's another handle that you go round and round with that actually has a magnetic top. You put the lid onto that and turn the handle at the top, and it compresses it. So it actually rolls the metal onto it, very similar to what they do today.
And to preserve food, for our listeners that haven't an idea, like me, about how you preserve food, what sort of things were they preserving?
Well, for the canning, they would slice up the fruit, put it into the cans. It could be plums. If it was plums, they probably kept them whole. Then you'd pour boiling water onto the top. You'd then seal them, and then you'd put them into boiling water, which would actually vacuum them in some way. If you were doing jam, obviously you boil up the fruit with the sugar in water and just keep boiling it till it gets thick, and then put it into the jars and then seal it. The bottling was the same, similar to the canning really. You just put your fruit in, cut it up or left it whole, and then just added hot water to it and put it into the jars.
So on display here, you've been preserving some gooseberries, and what's that underneath the gooseberries?
Apple in the jars. So gooseberries, apples, plums, green gages, cherries, if you were lucky to have them, because there were a few cherry trees around then. Strawberries, obviously. Those were the main ones that they used to preserve. Pears, if they could get hold of them. Anything, really. Blackberries, obviously, from the bushes. Anything at all that was preservable, they would do.
And how long would this fruit last in these preserving jars?
Preserving jars, it could go up to 3 years, believe it or not. And the cans, again, I mean, they lasted for a long, long time. So it was a very, very good way to conserve food.
What ho!
Now, we're going to go back to Sylvia after we play a bit of Alboli. But I've got Edna. You used to do a lot of these WI talks.
Yes.
I can get the jam thing from Jam and Jerusalem, because Sylvia's talking about all the jam they made, and I think she talks about it further in the next part of the interview. Mm-hmm. But what is this Jerusalem?
Well, WI was always nicknamed Jam and Jerusalem because, hopefully, if we've got it right, Sylvia will explain that jam making in wartime is really important, because you only got one jar of jam every 2 months. That was your ration. So to get everything from what nature was providing in the hedgerows, in the roadsides, along the fields, was really important to turn that to preserve it and to turn it into jam. So that was where WI became synonymous with jam. But the Jerusalem part came because they sang that as part of their sort of opening song for their meetings.
It's a hymn, isn't it?
It's a hymn, and I always remember that one of the first WI talks I did, because you have to be approved as a WI speaker. You can't just go along and talk to them. And one of the ones I got booked to do endlessly was wartime food. And I always remember you go along and you kind of set up your talk, and then you have to sit through their song, and you're expected to stand and join in. And I didn't know the words to Jerusalem. It was assumed that everybody did, because it's a real kind of traditional English hymn. And I felt like I was doing that. It just reminded me, and I was giggling to myself, who was that politician who was trying to sing along to the Welsh national anthem?
It's going many years ago. I think it's going back to the John Major government. It might even be Margaret Thatcher.
I think it was John Major.
It may have been John Major, and it wasn't him, but the Secretary of State for Wales.
Yeah.
Obviously wasn't Welsh.
No.
And he went to some event in Wales.
A big meeting, wasn't it?
A big meeting. And they started, or they either ended or they started the meeting by singing the Welsh national anthem.
And you could just see him.
He obviously didn't know it, and he's trying to mouth something like mime.
No, yeah, but he was clearly didn't know the words. And I just recalled that moment where I just felt like him, where I was going, long ago. And I just didn't know. Obviously, by the time you've done your third or fourth WI meeting, you get to know the tune and start to understand the words. And by about the fifth or sixth one, they actually gave me a copy of the words so I could sing along.
Then message each other. She don't know it.
She don't know it. Just give her the words and then she'll join in. But it was like they belted it out. And I went to sort of various WI all across Northamptonshire, Buckinghamshire, and a few in Bedfordshire, and some are the real fiercely traditional WI meetings with their embroidered tablecloth on the head table, and others were more radical, kind of young, completely different feel to the WI, and some didn't even sing it, which was shocking.
Did they all have a head table with a bit of knitting on the... Not knitting, the
flowers.
Cloth?
No, they all had fresh flowers on the head table where the secretary and, president sat. It just felt fiercely traditional, and for some of them it was a lovely feeling.
But you're also saying that some of these were quite hip.
Some
and
are very
trendy.
hip and trendy and radical, and they knit and natter and stitch and bitch, I think one lot called it, which felt very radical and new.
They'll be listening to rock and roll next.
They will be. Well, they went to Zumba classes and did all sorts. So it was a real kind of different, real spectrum of meetings. But yeah, that was my experience of the WI.
Well, we are going to hear from Sylvia.
Yes.
Again. She's going to go tell us more about her World War II reenactor impression based around the WI. But first... You've got to have a bit of Al Bowley, really, don't we?
Oh, you can't beat Al Bowley.
We do like a bit of Al.
What ho?
And this is where Jam and Jerusalem comes from in the very beginning. And if it wasn't for the women, I think our country would have starved, because in both areas, the Land Army and the Women's Institute, they really did a strong job. Now, at the beginning, the National Federation were asked by the Ministry to start up these centres, and they were given £1,400 in money of sugar. And this was just a grant to use for preserving. The Federation, the National Federation, then handed it to the local federations, who handed it to the WIs, who were going to be doing this, and this was the start of the preserving. So the canning machine I have here on the table was actually belonged to Bryston WI on the Isle of Wight. We had 2 canning stations on the island, Seaview and Bryston. So that was what they did. They used to collect all the fruit, bring it to the canning station, and then they would start canning. So they'd cut the fruit up, put it into the tins, pour in hot water, and then they would seal the cans and put them into hot water again to vacuum them. You'll see inside the town hall here we have some photographs, and it's got some women actually drying herbs, so they have herbs for the winter time. But women were taught how to start allotments up in the gardens, and also the WI again was encouraged to do this. So yes, a lot of that was done. The Land Army came into its own there, obviously. The men really resented the women being in the Land Army in the beginning because they thought they couldn't do the jobs, but actually they proved them wrong. But the women worked so hard. I mean, if you can imagine women coming from London or somewhere like that, coming into the country and having to do such hard work as ditch digging because they had no mechanical machinery to do it. And they had calluses, they had back trouble, stomach trouble. When they were using the threshing machines, when they were harvesting, they lost limbs. So really, they did a strong job, and without them, we wouldn't have had the bread of life.
What ho?
Ration, you actually only got 1 jar of jam to last you 3 months. So it was important to make your own.
Yes, it was. And even the WI that were making this weren't allowed to have them unless they were substandard. So somebody would come round and check the jam. If it was substandard, they were allowed to buy it. If it wasn't, if it was okay, it had to be sold. So they were very stringent in what they did. And they always had inspections, right the way through the time they were doing this.
So even though they were doing it on a voluntary basis, it was still done to a very professional standard where it was inspected, had to, I guess, be the right weight if you're selling it?
Yes, absolutely right, because it had to go all over the country and it had to be right, otherwise there would have been trouble. It was, and this is what the WI is about, even today. It is education, and this is what they did during the wartime and before and still afterwards, teaching women to be able to cope at home, make to amend. Jam in Jerusalem is still there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for talking to us about a very interesting exhibition, and we really do recommend coming over, having a look and having a chat, and really learning the role that the WI played, not only in wartime community and civilian life, but in very relevant to today's communities as well. Thank you.
What ho?
I've got a question for you, and it's not to do with the WI, but it's to do with that interview.
Yeah.
Were you in a bathroom? Because, man, did it echo.
It started off well, didn't it? And what happened was I was chatting away to Sylvia, and the event that we were at decided what we were talking about was so interesting. We got an extra microphone thrust under our... Noses, thank you. And we ended up being played out on the event PA as well, which was quite disconcerting when you're chatting away to somebody, having an interview, and then suddenly you can hear yourself in triplicate.
And does that account for there seemed to be a dogfight in the middle of it as well?
Yes, it was. It's what happens when you record radio is you can't then do another take, especially when you're playing out live to thousands of people at an event. You just have to carry on really and pretend that nobody's listening and you're just having a chat with somebody.
So I take my hat off to Sylvia and all the ladies from the WI who did sterling work.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's exactly as Sylvia was saying. They did a great job during the wartime, and it really is an institution that has carried on and has survived all the years subsequent, and they really have almost reinvented themselves, and they still do a really great job, and they still are, as I was saying earlier, you've got the really traditional ones right through to the really more modern day ones, and they're all really interesting, and I really highly recommend, if you're interested, go along to your local WI, and if it's not for you, try a different one, because they are so different in variety, but they still do that core job of educating women essentially to teach them new skills, which is what Sylvia was saying, which was very prevalent during the war. I always assumed everybody was good at everything, but it's the same as it is today. Some women had different strengths in things that they were good at, and they taught their skills to women, and you shared what you could do and helped each other out, and that's still very much the core of what the WI do today.
No, it's called the WI, but that's just the initials.
For the Women's Institute, Institute. So go and look online. There'll be one near you.
Because they are national.
They are,
It's not just something to the south of England.
No, they're all over the country, and there's loads in lots of towns and villages and little hamlets. So some of them have, massive followings, and some are just really small little gatherings of women. But I really do highly recommend going along and checking it out, because it's thoroughly interesting, and I'm just pleased it's still going from strength to strength.
Now, we've got the Merry Macs coming up.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's too much of a tongue twister for me.
Okay, would you like me to say what it is? It's, it's a really jolly tune, and it's Maisie Dotes and Dozy Dotes.
What ho?
There we go, the Merry Macs. Now, it's the end of the show. We are running out of time, so we need to say our goodbyes in a minute. But I'm taking us all the way back to the start of the show, where we were talking about coastal defences.
We were, and our Navy, and the fact that you can go from Portsmouth up to the Thames. Or not, maybe.
You know, there's somebody who's listening to this show, probably in Indonesia.
Yeah.
And is going, oh,
really?
Yeah,
so that's how you get out. That's how the Luftwaffe found their way to London. It's a good job that I didn't work for the Luftwaffe, isn't it? I'd have them going in the wrong direction.
Well, maybe it would have been a good idea.
Maybe it would have been a good thing.
Been a good idea. But anyway, we just don't throw these shows together. There's a link to all of these, because we're going to play out with Alan Breeze and the Fleet is in port again, because the Solent, Portsmouth, which the Solent leads to, is the home of the British Royal Navy. You just thought it was all put together.
See, cleverly planned.
It is. So it's just time for me to say tinkly tonk
and a toodle pip from me.
What ho?